In this video, I'm going to identify the major problems with The Purge, give solutions to those problems, and present a new version of the story to you today. And if you're interested in working with me to identify and solve every major problem in your feature-length screenplay draft, then click the link below and we can discuss working together one-on-one on your script. For now, let's fix The Purge. The Purge starts out with a fun concept and an interesting moral dilemma. All crime is legal one night a year so that the population can release their violence and aggression. And on this particular night, James and his family hunker down in their upper middle class house, until his son Charlie lets in a homeless man who's running away from a group of psychos trying to purge him.
Let's go! This way!
Here is where the story sets up the interesting dilemma. Do you give a stranger over to psycho killers to save your family? Or do you risk your family's safety to protect a stranger? Today I'm going to go act by act, identifying what works and what doesn't before I present my new version of the story. In Act 1, we meet James, an upper middle class man who sells purge security equipment to other upper middle class citizens. The first problem I noticed is when we meet the neighbors. They essentially talk about nothing. This could be a great time to set up what James believes and potentially create conflict between him and the neighbors, but we don't get it. When James eats with his family at the dinner table, again, nothing really happens. We don't learn anything of value about the characters, we just see them talking as a normal family. It falls pretty flat.
I don't want to do this anymore. It's stupid.
Soon after, we get a scene which finally shows what the characters believe. James is pro-purge. His son Charlie isn't so sure what he thinks. They hold different viewpoints, which places them into conflict. This is good.
Look, I know this is difficult to understand at your age, but tonight allows people a release.
You don't remember how bad it was, Charlie. The poverty, all the crime.
This night saved our country.
When the purge begins, the family locks the house down, and here we get the added element of the weird boyfriend, Henry, who has a pretty nonsensical goal: kill the father of his girlfriend because he won't let them be together. Then we have our inciting incident. Charlie sees a homeless man being chased outside, and he lowers the security, opens the house, and lets the man in. This is also where the boyfriend decides it's his time to shine and attacks James.
Mr. Sandin.
James, he has a gun! Henry has a gun!
Chaos ensues. Zoe, Henry, and the homeless man are lost somewhere in the house. James and Mary go looking for them. They meander for a bit until the purgers show up, and here the story adds to the dilemma. The purgers outside are upper middle class young people, as we can see by their preppy clothing, and they are hunting the homeless man, believing he is nothing more than trash.
Please just let us purge. Toodaloo, Sandins.
James agrees to give the homeless man to them so that his family doesn't die. Good. James is making a choice based upon what he believes. Why should he care about this guy? He wants to save his family, so he goes to look for the man. The biggest issue with the first act is that most of the scenes only exist to set up eventual payoffs or things we will use externally in the story. And this is necessary, but it also creates flat scenes with little genuine conflict because there's nothing else going on in the scene. External conflict by itself isn't interesting. What makes it interesting is challenging character beliefs and forcing them to make choices based upon the external obstacles in their way. But while it's a little rocky, it's not the worst opening. It sets up the ethical dilemma of saving the homeless man versus giving him to the purgers, and we're interested in what will happen next. Now we head into Act 2. In Act 2, James wants to find the homeless man and give him to the killers outside. But Charlie doesn't want to turn him over. Why should he die? So with the help of his toy, Charlie helps the homeless man get into a hiding spot. The psychos outside say they will get inside soon. While Mary searches the house, Zoe goes to hide in the secret spot and ends up getting grabbed by the homeless man. Mary finds them both and shoots the man. But Zoe is knocked unconscious. James and Mary forcibly grab the homeless man, torture him a bit, and get him into a chair. But this is where the characters have their moment of change. They look at what they're doing and feel horrified.
Baby,
This is so wrong.
listen, we don't have any other choice. We don't have a choice.
Don't touch me. Okay, look at you. No. Don't touch me.
Mary gets super upset and changes. She doesn't believe in the purge anymore. When Zoe wakes up, James shows remorse about shooting Henry. And here, Zoe changes as well. She doesn't believe in the purge either. And the homeless man stops fighting. He shifts. He tells James to save his family and give him up to the purgers.
Take me outside.
Because of this moment, James also changes his view and decides that it's morally good to defend the homeless man rather than handing him over. So this is the big change moment in the story where all of the characters arc. So James has now chosen to save the homeless man and fight. But the bad guys outside take off the doors and windows. Mary immediately changes her view back and decides to send the homeless man to the killers. But James now says no.
Well, you're not sending him outside.
I have another idea.
The family straps up and readies for a fight, notably without the homeless man as he is injured. James fights off the psychos until the main killer stabs him and says,
Was this life really worth yours? Your family's?
which honestly, he makes a decent point. James believes in the purge. His reason for deciding to save the homeless man was only because his family was turning on him, not because he changed his philosophical view on the legitimacy of the purge. This is what makes the moment of change for James at the midpoint fall a bit flat. Now, as we enter Act 3, the story fully leaves the initial dilemma, which was about whether or not to give this homeless man up, and shifts into simply trying to surprise the audience. And the final end of the film just feels weird. In Act 3, the family finds James hurt, Zoe kills the main purger, and James dies. But suddenly, the neighbors show up. They kill the remaining purgers, but in a twist, they are here to kill the family.
Don't thank us too much, Mary. The truth is, you're ours, not theirs.
What do you mean, ours?
When the neighbors show up at the end, the film really derails. It adds this weird twist with very little motivation. The neighbors want to kill the family because they are just jealous of their slightly bigger house. It's just not that strong.
You made so much money off of us, and then you just stuck it in our faces. You all think you're so damn perfect.
Then the neighbors stand around doing a cult-like ritual until the homeless man comes in and saves the family. From here on out, the film meanders to the end. Mary lets the neighbors live, and they sit and ponder life and existence until the sun comes up. Then everyone leaves. Mary, Charlie, and Zoe save the life of a stranger they didn't know, and it cost them their father and husband. Was it worth it? To me, the viewer, it doesn't feel very cathartic. So what if we were going to rebuild the story? What might it look like? In the current version of the story has an interesting ethical dilemma. But the story doesn't make that the focus, and this harms the plot. But now we will focus the entire story around this ethical dilemma, and you will watch how everything begins to make sense. Here's the question we will explore. Is your family's lives more important than the life of a stranger in need? In the current version of the story, the answer to this question is kind of no, but it doesn't attempt to answer the question clearly. However, there is another element to the story, which is, should you give in to the demands of psychos? And thinking about this opposing question, we can change our main character to create a more interesting ethical dilemma. The most important character to fix is our protagonist, James. Rather than James being pro-purge, James could be anti-purge. He doesn't believe in the new founding fathers or in their once-a-year murder spree. He believes he must take care of his family no matter what. So he is pragmatic. He saw the purge as an opportunity to expand his security business and ultimately keep his family safe as these new rulers take over America. James believes that he is not responsible for the lives of the general public. His duty and responsibility is keeping his family safe at all costs. Charlie holds a more generally altruistic view and believes that we should look after those in need of help no matter what. Mary could hold a similar view to Charlie, but ultimately just wants her family to be safe. Zoe can start believing similarly to her mother and brother, but when she is grabbed by the homeless man, her opinion starts to change. She ultimately looks out for her own well-being and, obviously, does not want to die. Henry is a weak character in the initial version of the story, but he can work for this new story. Henry is the only one in the house who believes in the purge and its value. He, like the purgers outside, believe giving the homeless man to the killers isn't just necessary, but the right thing to do. The neighbors should believe in the purge just like they do in the original story, which can create some conflict between them and James rather than what we see in the original story where they have zero obvious conflict in the beginning. The homeless man simply wants to survive the night. He believes the purge exists because the elite see him as a waste and want him gone. So he just wants to survive, and he is willing to do what is necessary to live. And ultimately, he has a very similar view to James, just in different circumstances, which we will look at more later. Now that we have a better understanding of the characters and their beliefs, let's look at a new version of the story and see how it could have played out. As we do this, I will also show how the acts could be rebuilt using Dan Harmon's story circle. Act 1. In the beginning of the story, we meet James, a security salesman whose business has boomed since the purge began. We also meet a few of his neighbors. This is where we can set up the neighbors versus James. The neighbors invite James and his family to their purge party, but he declines, and they're a bit shocked, but they let it slide. When they praise the new founding fathers in front of him, James can nod politely, but keeps driving. Now we have some initial conflict between James and the neighbors. They have different views on the purge, and we get to immediately see how James is different. James wants to keep his family safe and survive the night. When he arrives at the house, we can set up some of the external plot promises, like Charlie's toy here. At the dinner table, Charlie asks his dad a question. If you don't believe in the purge, why do you sell security equipment? James explains that he does what he needs to do to keep the family safe, and he provides them with a secure house and a safe neighborhood. He wishes the purge didn't exist, but rather than doing nothing, he is pragmatic, and no matter what happens, he will keep them safe. When the purge begins, Henry has hidden in Zoe's room. Henry tells Zoe that he's going to convince James to let him be with Zoe. As Henry confronts James, Charlie sees a man calling for help outside. He opens the security doors and lets the man in. James immediately leaps into action to protect his family from this intruder, and Henry attacks the homeless man. In the chaos that ensues, the homeless man grabs Zoe, knocks Henry out, and flees into the darkness of the home. James puts Charlie and Mary in the safe room, grabs some guns, and goes out looking for Zoe, Henry, and the homeless man. After some searching, he finds Henry. James gives Henry a gun to help him find the homeless man, when suddenly, the killers who were hunting the homeless man show up at the front door and deliver an ultimatum. Send the man outside, or everyone in the house dies. James tells the killers he will find the man and give him to them. In Act 2, James wants to find the homeless man and give him over to the killers to keep his family safe. In the safe room, Charlie and Mary argue about Charlie's decision to allow the man into the home. Charlie believes the man will not hurt the family if he is allowed to stay inside. But the fact that the man might hurt Zoe makes Charlie pause and think. In the house, the homeless man gets the jump on Henry, disarms him, and runs off into the darkness. Henry searches for James and tells him what happened. They search the house together until James and Henry find the homeless man. But he has Henry's gun to Zoe's head. James calmly tells the man that they can talk and work this out. Henry is surprised and tells James to shoot him. James tells the homeless man he can keep his weapon, but he has to let Zoe go. It's not optional. James says that if he hurts her, then he will die tonight no matter what happens. After a moment of thought, the homeless man agrees to let Zoe go. Henry protests, but James puts him back in his place. He tells him if he wants to be with Zoe, he will take her back to the safe room, so Henry obeys. Now, James and the homeless man sit in the dark room to talk. In Act 2, Part 2, James wants to keep his family safe. And here, the homeless man pleads his case, and they are able to have a discussion about what should happen. James sits down across from the homeless man and tells him to explain why he shouldn't send him to the psychos outside. The homeless man finally speaks. He says he's just trying to survive the night and he doesn't deserve to die. He believes this night is about the elimination of the poor. James doesn't disagree with him, and he doesn't like this situation either, but James explains that if you force him to choose between the life of a stranger or the lives of his children, he will choose his children every time. The homeless man ponders this, then asks an important question. Does that mean you should give in to the demands of psychos? If you give me up, you're a part of this now. You think you're different, but if you send me out there to them, you've killed me. You have purged. This weighs on James, and ultimately, he decides that if the homeless man agrees to defend the house against the attackers alongside James, he should be allowed to earn his survival. But back in the safe room, Henry doesn't agree. While this conversation is happening, he figures out how to open a window or air vent to let some of the psychos in. The first few are able to crawl into the home. And now we can fulfill the promise of the genre and create some fun jump scares and other thriller horror moments. James and the homeless man realize that a few of the killers have gotten in, so they search the house and eliminate them in a sequence full of jump scares and tension. And now James and the homeless man are fully allied, and James has gone from being passively anti-purge to actively anti-purge. In Act 3, James wants to survive the night with his family and the homeless man. The killers tell Henry that they won't hurt those who stay inside the safe room, so Henry locks Zoe, Mary, and Charlie in the safe room with him. At the same time, the psychos get their heavy equipment and the front door is opened. But Zoe turns on Henry, not wanting to watch her father die. And Mary decides she isn't going to let Henry call the shots either, and they take Henry down. Mary arms herself and goes out to defend her house while Charlie fires up his toy rover and runs recon. Here we can have our all-out horror fight, where James, Mary, and the homeless man cut down the psychos with machine guns, shotguns, and household weapons. They've won, until the neighbors show up. And now, the neighbors' motivation is much clearer. These upper-class masked psychos were the neighbors' children. They see that James and his family are openly anti-purge, anti-new founding fathers, and the killers of their children. They hold the family at gunpoint, ready to ceremoniously purge them, when, out of nowhere, the homeless man rushes in, kills the neighbors, and saves the family. And now, at the end, the homeless man is a part of the family. James tells him that no matter what happens, he will always have a place he can rest and people he can trust. The end. Of course, you could spend months perfecting this story, but this is a quick version of what the story could look like. And if you're interested in working with me to identify and solve every major problem in your feature-length screenplay draft, then click the link below and we can discuss working together on your script. Thanks for watching.